Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome back to the Couchside Judges. I'm Scott Fontana. You can find me on Twitter at Scott_Fontana.
And I'm Dan Urban. You can find me on Twitter as well at Dan Urban MMA. You can follow the podcast at Couchside Judges. And you can subscribe wherever you listen, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Google, anywhere.
And if you like what you're hearing, please give us that 5-star review. It looks great for us. We appreciate it.
We're going to talk about judging in MMA, so you might as well learn the criteria, which can be found at abcboxing.com.
So, Dan, you're pumped about this episode, right?
I'm very excited about this.
This is, I think, going to be one of the finest hour plus. And I think it is actually, I think this is our longest show, Dan.
This will be our longest one, probably.
This is our longest show. And I think I think we're justified in doing so because this is the day that we welcome to the Couchside Judges Marc Goddard, the venerable referee from England.
Yeah, this was a fun episode. He's such a nice guy.
He was terrific. You know, we already spoke. We already had this conversation. We're recording this intro post conversation, and we'll get to it in just a few minutes. You'll hear what Marc had to say to us and inform us about all things that he is an expert at. The one of the foremost knowledgeable people in the world in terms of officiating mixed martial arts, and it really was a thrill to speak with him and thrill to learn from him. I picked up a lot. Did you?
Oh, I learned a ton talking to him. It was really a pleasure. I
think you guys will too. I think there are a lot of people who appreciate what he can inform about officiating in general, and especially a lot of other topics that he's involved in. So and
it seemed like he could talk forever, but why don't we just jump right into it?
Welcome to the Couchside Judges, Marc. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
No problem. I've heard good things.
Excellent. We'd like to hear that. Yeah. So before we even dive in, this is going to come a little bit out of left field, but I know you're from Birmingham, right? My English ancestry comes from Birmingham. They used to live in an area, I think it's called Digbeth on Bradford Street. Do you know anything about this area? Are you from anywhere near there?
Yeah, Digbeth, very well. It's right in the middle that's right in the city centre, that is Digbeth.
Interesting. I've never gotten over there. I'd love to be able to see. They used to have they used to be merchants and on Bradford Street. So I would love to kind of see what it looked like there one day. I don't know how much it looks the same as it did in the 1850s, but
yeah, Digbeth is one of the, because it's in the middle, it's like one of the oldest parts of Birmingham. It was like it was very industrial back in the day. Yes, but it's some good pubs. Some good old world pubs. It's
what's a like, shout one out.
Oh, in Digbeth, there's a famous pub called the Spotted Dog. I remember that at 16 years old, going in there trying to sneak in and buy pints at 16. But Digbeth is known like there's some little quirky, really, really old pubs. In fact, one of the oldest, I think it's still there, on the main Stratford Road. When you come out of Digbeth, it's one of the oldest. I think it's still the oldest building, if not Birmingham, one of the oldest in quite a distance. Can't remember the name of it, but yeah, Digbeth it's like a trendy area now.
Interesting.
It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's funny. I'm definitely gonna have to check that. That's another thing too, because like when you haven't been from the country, you don't know like is it like a shady part of town or anything like that. So like knowing that, like, oh yeah, I could go visit it.
Yeah, it's got little shady parts, but you'll be all right in Birmingham.
Right on. But again, you're not originally from Birmingham. You're from Glasgow, correct?
Yeah, I was born in Scotland. I was born in Glasgow, Scotland, Scottish parents, but I actually moved. Well, my family moved to Birmingham when I was just a young boy. So, 90% of my life, I went to school and grew up in Birmingham, and this is where I now call home.
Sure. But I actually, the reason I bring it up, though, is my grandmother is from nearby Johnston.
Oh, no, Johnston, yeah. That's just outside Glasgow. Yeah.
Do you go up there very often? Do you, you have relatives still up there? Or?
Yeah, I still have family in Scotland. Like all of my mum's side of the family are still majorly in Scotland. But I still go up now and again. And I used to go up, I used to work with a local promotion up in Scotland, but they haven't been doing shows for a couple of years. But Scotland is beautiful. It's a tiny country, but very historical. Glasgow's amazing. Edinburgh's amazing. But then when you go out and travel, like Scotland in itself, the Scottish Highlands, and it's absolutely breathtaking. It's an amazing country, believe me.
I can't wait to visit one day.
So, Mark, one thing we love to do with our guests is ask about the origins of their MMA journey. What got you into the sport?
I've been fortunate enough to be around with MMA in the UK pretty much since its inception. Since I went back into training as a youngster, I was training in various martial arts and never really took anything serious. And it wasn't until I moved house. And when I moved house, my then next door neighbor, he was a traditional jiu-jitsu instructor. And this is before the days of, before we knew what Brazilian jiu-jitsu was.
Okay.
And then he started talking to me like, everything was by fate. And he asked if I'd come and train. And I said yes. And the rest is history. And then he was the first person. It was like the old cliche. He was the first person that gave me some videotapes, UFC 1 to 3, and then we're watching, a young, skinny Brazilian by the name of Royce Gracie choking people out left, right, and center. And we thought we were doing the same thing in traditional jiu-jitsu. And then that was, that's well over 20 years ago. And my journey, that's when I went back to training and I never stopped. I've been involved in the sport ever since.
That's so cool. So, and obviously you ended up going into fighting yourself. And I heard that you were an animal in the cage back in your day, right? Before you hung up.
Yeah. I mean, I had, I wouldn't change anything for the world. I was, that my journey with MMA, I've been around it for a long time. I'm loath to say that I've seen and done it all because that's impossible. But I'm very fortunate in the fact that I've been around the sport, mixed martial arts, before it really took hold or people even knew what it was. Back when I was first fighting MMA, there wasn't even any cages in the UK. We were fighting on open mats and tatamis.
Oh, wow.
And the first cage in the UK was actually 2002. So, the turn of the millennium, and then just after the millennium, when we were competing, it was either on a tatami or in a ring. And then 2002, that's when the first cage were actually down in Portsmouth. It was actually Cage Warriors. It was the very first ever. I showed you how long. You guys know Cage Warriors, right?
Of course.
That's when they first came to town. Cage Warriors have been around since 2002. They're going to be coming up to a 20-year anniversary soon. Wow. And still going strong.
That's really cool. So what kind of fighter were you? What was your style like? What was your mentality like? How did you approach bouts? What were you known as, I guess?
I mean, I was more because I was wrestling too. That's another thing that people didn't like. In Birmingham, we were quite lucky because wrestling, in particular freestyle wrestling, it's a very, very small sport. Here it's a very niche sport in the UK, but Birmingham we were quite fortunate. We had quite a hotbed, and we had our wrestling coach Jim. He's still on. I mean, he's 83 years old now, and he's like as old school as they get. Like I said, from my fighting time, like when you said mentality, that's kind of what let me down a little bit because I went into it in detail once with I done another podcast with a guy called Daniel Strauss, not the Daniel Strauss who used to fight at Bellator.
Oh, okay.
There's another Daniel Strauss who lives here. Very, very good, a jiu-jitsu guy. Like he's world class. He's really good. And I kind of went into the whole journey, the mental aspect of fighting that I used to struggle with, the psychology of it and stuff. And then I would be very good one week or one fight and then disastrous the next. And it led to me, it was around about 2005. I'm retiring in 2005. That shows how long ago. And then I stopped and I just went to wrestling. I done boxing and wrestling for almost 2 years. Then I came back. And I came back at I was a light heavy. People think I'm a big guy, like stature wise. I'm not really, when you look at true heavyweights, they're true big guys. I came back at a lighter weight, as a light heavyweight. I never lost at that weight, but I was getting older and injuries. And then the reffing was taken off because that's something else with me. The whole journey into reffing was completely by accident. I didn't plan on doing it. It kind of found me. And then I believe that was for a reason. And here we are.
I'm glad you brought that up, because actually that was one of our next questions, was what kind of brought you to it? You're saying it was by accident. How did you get there, and how did it really convince you that this is where you wanted to go with kind of your martial arts career, I guess?
2004, I was due to compete. I was fighting on an event. I got injured, which meant I couldn't fight, obviously. And the event was run by two friends of mine. Actually, they're still friends of mine, but they owned the gym that we all trained out of at the time. And I turned up. Something happened to one of the other refs, and they didn't turn up, or he wasn't going to ref. And then Steve, the owner, he turned around to me and said, "You got a ref?" He said it wasn't even like a request. It was like an order. And I was like, right, okay, whatever. And I think what it was, because obviously at the time, it was such a niche sport in the UK, but all the fighters knew me because, we were still quite a small scene. And I just went in and done it, and it just all kind of came to me, and it kind of took over, and the rest is history. It was.
How did you like? I mean, you hadn't really been trained as an official or anything like that. Like, what did you do to just kind of wing it, or?
I just went with my instincts, because obviously as a competitor, obviously understood the sport, knew the rules, or as in enough at that point to get by. And that's why I've always kind of said to people, like, when people talk about, do officials, referees, do you have to have been an ex-fighter? No, it was good for me, because I didn't know at the time, obviously, the qualities that you have as a person are more important. You can think yourself, there's a lot of fighters out there who are probably the last person you'd want to be a referee in your fight. But then there's some other guys. And I've always said that if you're not a practitioner of the sport, either recreationally as a ref and a judge, you're going to struggle. But the whole thing that I need to put to bed is about when people ask, "Oh, you ex-fighters should be this." No, that is not true at all. It doesn't have to be an ex-fighter. It's not an automatic rite of passage that will make you a good official. I was just one of the lucky ones, I guess. And I believe in fate, and I believe that those things were meant to happen for me. And like I say, here we are.
Right on.
So most people know you as a ref, but you do have a handful of entries on MMA decisions as a judge. Why don't we see you in the chair more often?
Because obviously I am a ref, but I teach. Obviously, I live and breathe the sport, and have done I've lived and breathed MMA for in excess of 20 years. I teach officials globally, referees and judges, and like some of the guys you've probably spoke to will tell you, like I'm like a tough taskmaster for them, but we're always talking, we're always communicating, because all I ever want is the best. I take it, I've took this seriously enough that I've been fortunate. And I say fortunate, not lucky, because I've just been fortunate enough, if you apply yourself to something, and this is my life, outside of my family, and mixed martial arts is my living. It's how I provide. And that's taken a long time to get there. But in answer to the question with the judging side, that's the, if you're going to teach people, you got to be able to walk the walk. I could go to any event, and at the drop of a hat, somebody says, "Mark, can you judge this fight?" And of course I can do it. I know the sport inside out, but that doesn't mean you know everything, because I don't believe there's such a thing, especially in a sport that's still as juvenile and formative as MMA. There's too many things that I go to some countries sometimes, and I meet people and officials, and they go, I know everything. Wow. Maybe that's just the language barrier, but this is the thing with the unique thing about MMA. Things will happen in fights, in and around fights, that you could never script. and never plan. I love judging. I'm always teaching judges. I'm always communicating with judges, and like the core set of guys, like I said, from some of the guys you've probably spoke to as well, we're always communicating, always swapping notes, always trying to be the best, always trying to learn off each other. It's a never-ending thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And education really does seem to be a very important part of this sport to you. You know, you're already talking about this. My understanding is that you held I don't know if it was your first or the first or just the first in Birmingham, but there was a seminar, a judging and reffing seminar in 2010. Ben Cartledge was mentioning this, and he wanted to make sure that we actually mentioned just how influential on him you are. He wanted us to make sure that this was mentioned. What can you tell us about kind of this first seminar and how influential it was to everybody who was there?
Yeah, I mean that's nice to hear, because you know Ben's a great guy. You know, I'm lucky enough. I'll use the word lucky there, because you know it's kind of like with the guys in the UK, the guys who have elevated and become great officials. We're all good friends, you know, and that's not a coincidence, because for me it was like when I'd done that first seminar in the UK, it was because they're, as you know, the sport is unregulated over here. You know, that there isn't athletic commissions or regulatory bodies, which is not always a good thing. Mm-hmm. You know, but in general, obviously everybody always used to look west, you know, because that's where the sport was entirely formative. People are going to lose their shit. And, you know, what about Brazil, Vale Tudo? What about shooter and pancreas? We know there's been derivatives of various styles of mixed martial arts in history. No one can take that away. But for want of a better description, and when you're talking to the layman, you know, MMA is that acronym. It's that 3-letter word. You know, you say to a guy in the pub, MMA, they're like, what? If you say UFC, they're instantly going to know what you're talking about. So coming back to, you know, and obviously with the unified rules, etc., I was a staunch advocate of them, and realizing that, listen, stop trying to buck the trend. We don't need to do anything different. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The sport's here, and the sport can be recognized. And that's kind of what I was trying to do, because it's still so fragmented. But in the UK, I was like on a one-man crusade to try and drag people kicking and screaming onto the same page and trying to get them to follow, because there were so many different rule sets, even here in the UK. And I managed to get hold of so many people, you know, whether they liked it or not, and drag them to it kicking and screaming. But yeah, that first seminar that I'd done for refs and judges, that was an amazing day. And like you said, you know, when Ben was there, and, you know, Ben, he's not the only one, obviously, but he's, this is the thing, you know, with judging, as you know, it's the biggest problem with officiating in MMA is we are dogged in milestone fashion by misconception and untruth. That's the biggest problem we have.
I would agree.
100%. It's the biggest problem we have. It's the misconceptions and the fact that people don't understand. They don't necessarily have to understand. You know, you can't expect, if you go to a football game or a soccer game over here and there's 60,000 people in the stadium, do you think all 60,000 of them know the rules inside and out? No. They don't. And they don't have to. But for MMA, it's just, for some reason, I can't quite, I think it's, like I said, the reason I think it's like that is because the sport is still so young. It's still evolving, and we're getting better, and it's still formative, and there's still a lot of antiquated, older ideas and notions around that it's going to take us quite a while to get through and get over.
Well, for what it's worth, Ben actually wanted to make sure the quote I used from him was that Marc Goddard taught me how to judge fights properly. So when you hear that, I'm sure that fills you with a lot of pride.
That does, because Ben, listen, I would walk into Ben Cartledge. Ben's not a good judge, you know. Ben is a great judge, and that's how I differentiate. I think there's a lot of good officials. There's not many great officials, but there's teams like in the UK. I would walk into any fight on the planet with a team of, you know, an all UK team of judges, with Ben, with Mark Collette, with David Leatherby. You guys know, obviously, you guys are are well in on this and you're good advocates of it. In the US, the guys like Sal D'Amato, Derek Cleary, Mike Bell, Chris, these guys have been around. There's not many others really on the thing, in a world with 7.5 billion people, not saying that MMA reaches 7.5 billion people, but there's very few others. And look, we have got some absolute top of the tree, world-class professional judges in this country. And Ben is a fantastic example of that.
So when you're training these, the refs and the judges, what are your biggest points of emphasis?
Like I said, misconceptions.
Okay.
Because if I go to the Middle East, for instance, where the sport could still be, to them, or not brand new, but very formative, or I'll go to Russia. Russia's a great example because, and again, they've been used to doing things in their way. And it's not saying that everything you do is wrong. It's just different, So it's that slow process of trying to get everybody. Like I said, it may not even be in my lifetime when we get this sport finally to sing and sit as one, that we have. It's what I say when I'm doing the seminars, and I say to people, I'll take our closest relative, and from a combat sports perspective, that's boxing, because it's the easiest parallel to draw, and to look at the differences between us. Like, you have amateur boxing and professional boxing. How do we know? Well, there's a visual aesthetic there that's really simple to understand. I'll see amateurs, boxers with vests or head guards, bigger gloves, but you've got to be pretty keen to understand that. And then I'll see professional boxing. I'll recognize it. I can watch professional boxing in Brazil and be in Sweden. I don't need to speak the language. I don't have to understand, but I can tell what's happening. I can watch it in China. I can watch it in Canada. The sport is the same. They have a single unified rule set. If somebody during a boxing match suddenly dives on someone's legs for a single, I know there's a problem.
Yeah.
With MMA, we're 75 years behind that, 85 years behind that, because we have so many different. But I try and say to people, that's okay. Don't lose sight of the fact that we're a young sport. We're still learning. We're still getting better, and we're trying to build the sport. It's almost like an inverted pyramid. That's how I describe it. It's because you've got the UFC's at the top. Let's make no bones about it. And they are the recognized brand of the sport, like I just said. They're the Coca-Cola, the Hoover. Mm-hmm. People don't refer to it as, they don't refer to it as the entity. They refer to it as the brand. And rightly so, because they've led the way.
So beyond knowing misconceptions, is there any advice you would give those at home who've been unable to get started in their journey to becoming officials but are interested, especially those who have been impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, that's probably the most common question I get asked. I get so many, honestly, thousands of messages, and people say, it makes me laugh because, Ben, I'll tell you, it's funny because even stuff like that, you'll get people like very polite. Hey, Mr. Goddard, Eddie, I'm here, I'm this and that. And then I'll get people like, yo, Goddard. I'm like, okay, do you think I'm going to give you a response? Probably not. If I walk in to apply for a job and I say to the manager, hey, yo, what's up? Chances are I'm not going to get through the front door. But if I approach the manager in the right way, we're probably going to get off to a better start. But all joking aside, I actually put a video out on my Instagram last time I was in Fight Island, just explaining to people, okay, it's fantastic that you want to get into this thing, but like me and Ben and the guys, there seems to be a notion when it comes to being an official in MMA that people think it's just something they can have a go at. They think it just, one day I could do that, and that's not the case. I explain to people that just like any career or any vocation or any industry, it takes time. You're going to have to craft this thing over months and months and years. Just take your time. Like I said, depending on the country in which you live, if you have a regulatory body or an athletic commission, those are the first people you've got to make contact with. But it's all about educating yourself. And I know it's tough. I understand it's hard, but you've got to be able to educate yourself and prove your competency. And that's not exclusive to being an official in MMA. That's the same for any job, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
For sure.
So you actually, I'm glad you mentioned kind of this video that you made on and posted on social media, because it was just over the weekend. You shared that you're filming a new project, right? You kind of teased it, I guess, to a degree.
Yeah.
It sounds like, and I'm interpreting this, it sounds like it has to do with educating officials or something like that. Am I on the right track? Is there anything you could say about it right now?
Yeah, it's exactly that, because obviously one thing this pandemic has taught us in the last year is that things are now being done differently, whereas traditionally, if I'm training officials, I'm going to be there present with them. And I like to, look into the whites of their eyes and gauge the conversation back, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, in today's world, that's not always the easiest thing to do. So we have to look at ways of getting the correct information to people in remote places or faraway places. And obviously with the power of today's technology and having various mediums to do that, that's kind of where I've struck the chord in my mind to be able to start offering that to people. It's going to take a lot of work, because it's going to be protected content, of course. This is not going to be out there in the public domain. It's just, for me, it's like a service almost. It's
Sure.
like a country that's quite some way away from mainland Europe or from the US, and they have no feasible way of getting somewhere or understanding that. I think it's just it's a fair tool to be able to give people. I have to be very careful with it, obviously, because I have to make the distinction. It's like we know what the world's like, and what social media is like. Because what we can't do is, obviously, you can't grade or assess somebody to be an MMA official entirely online. That's quite a tall order.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, so people are, oh, fucking, oh, God, he's grading people online. No. There's two very distinct parts, okay? Obviously, to be a good official, in particular with a referee, okay, you will have a theoretical base, a knowledge base, and you'll have a practical base, as in watching or demonstrating that you are fit for purpose, you're knowledgeable and you're competent to do the actual live role. That's the part that you can't assess remotely. You have to be able to see, you have to present a body of work, etc. But there is absolutely nothing preventing the detailed explanation behind the theoretical knowledge needed. That's the part that we're missing. And that's the part that I want to capitalize on and make sure that it can be offered to a much wider audience.
I think that's great. I love that. And you're actually also involved with the IMMAF as well. You're the Director of Regulatory Affairs, correct?
That's correct.
I only have a very base level knowledge of the IMMAF, and I think that I'm probably of the rare people in America who have even heard of this organization. What can you tell our listeners who are very unfamiliar with it, even at a base level?
The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation is a solely amateur organization. It's set up to, there's over 120 now member federations globally, and it's solely set up for developing this sport. Like I said before, I was talking about the inverted triangle. Amateur MMA is it's hard to come by. Done correctly, it's hard to come by. And obviously, like I said, that the sport of mixed martial arts right now, it's still so fragmented. It's done in many different ways in many different countries with no form of commonality. I keep pulling it back to like the boxing example again. So the premise of IMMAF was set up. And that's what they approached me right at the start, and that's what kind of pricked up my ears and got my attention. Is that they weren't trying to take over the world. They weren't trying to be a UFC. They weren't trying to be. They wanted to concentrate solely on the amateur development and making sure that we, without sounding cliched, is that the stars of tomorrow, that's where they come through. Like the last in 2019, the World Championships was in Bahrain. There was 550 athletes. There was over 50 countries. It's one of the most full. Working with World Championship fights and stadiums and Vegas and all the big, that's all amazing. It's fantastic. But the fulfillment that I get for working, because that's where I come in, looking after and developing the officials, because MMA has to work in unison, right? Just as it is about developing the talent, it's the same for the officials. It's the same for everybody involved in the sport. And that's where I come in and help train the officials globally, get a single common unified rule set. Honestly, I can't, it's a very, very close and personal project to me. I love what I do with them. And I would implore anybody listening to get behind it, because it's only going to get bigger, and IMMAF, IMMAF.org is where to go and find out all the information. And you'll see just how many world champion and different regional championships we've had around the world, and have a look at some of the young athletes, people see in the UFC right now, Brendan Allen, Amanda Hebus, even with the IMMAF actually amalgamated with WMMA. That was another big organization. And you look at them, you've got Magomed Sharapov, Peter Yan, all these guys, particularly from the Russian side, they all came through the amateurs too. People forget just how important that is. If we don't develop the amateurs correctly, that conveyor belt and that continual stream of finding the stars is it's not going to go about it in the right way.
So Fight Island has ended up being a great opportunity for judges and officials across Europe to work fights. Is the IMMAF involved in that process at all?
If you look in Google, you'll find some very interesting news articles with IMMAF, because obviously some of the officials that I've helped nurture and train, and like I said, just to give you the scale of the World Championships, for instance, in Bahrain that are referred to, for over 500 athletes, over 50 countries. In fact, so there's 5 days of competition, actually 5 fighting days. On the one day of competition, there was 98 fights alone.
Oh my God!
Wow. There was 4 cages, and I'm sat there like at the central control, over all the teams, and it's absolutely phenomenal. And the intensity and the learning capability and the advantage that those officials will get being immersed in something like that, with me sat, at the top of them, helping them and bring them together, we've produced some absolute world-class judges. A name you've probably heard is Clemens Werner from Germany.
A lot of respect for Clemens Werner.
Clemens is my boy. He's like Ben and Dave and them. He's one of the guys that I've watched flourish. And like I said, apart from, when I go and teach people, it's phenomenal. It's very fulfilling. But I kind of say I'm teaching them. I'm kind of making suggestions. I'm not merely teaching. I'm making suggestions to them. All the real nitty gritty and the things that it's going to take to succeed. That absolutely comes from the individual, 100%. The work ethic and all the qualities that I can't give them to somebody. I can beat you over the head with the theory and the knowledge all day, and I'll put it to you in such a way that you will not forget, and I'll explain it to you in a good way. But when those guys or girls take that information and then they go on to become what they have, Clemens is a fantastic example. Clemens, Vito from Italy. There's so many guys that have now came through that, just as they do with fighters. Fighters come on, get to a good world stage with amateur, gain as much experience as possible, and then prove themselves on the world stage. It's exactly the same for officials, exactly the same process.
That's very cool. And I really love that you were able to tell us about, just the way it works with like 98 fights in one day. That's insane.
In one day there was 4. I was a little bit pissed off actually, because I wanted it to be 100, but we lost a couple of fights. I wanted to break the 3-figure mark, but we actually lost a couple of fights because, and like I said, honestly, if you saw the operation behind it, it would blow your mind. It's absolutely incredible, and it's, like I said, it's one of the most fulfilling things, that I do. You got young kids there, 18, 19, just, and the skill level, it's absolutely incredible. It's like any other sport. You look at the young athletes now and put them in a team 30 years ago, they'd wipe the floor with them and kick their ass. And it's the same with the youngsters now. The level of them it's astonishing. And all the names that you're going to hear in the next 5 or 10 years, mark my words, they'll have came through that process.
All righty. So, we're talking about obviously international fights and the international fight scene. Talking about, I heard a story. I heard there's an interesting story behind one international event that you worked. It was the UFC's trip to Busan at the end of 2019, and you took a bullet train across South Korea. I'd love to hear the story behind this.
I did. It was cool because it was that was actually my last trip of that year. And 2019 was, I look back on 2019 and I'm mesmerized because it was if I showed you how many countries I was in and out of, it was the busiest year I've had by far. I was here, there, and everywhere. So what I did is I actually spoke to the UFC and said, "Hey, look, I'm gonna book my own flight for this. Is that okay? Can we do it? And we'll work something out." And they said, "Yeah, no problem." And when I was looking at it, and actually flying into Busan was quite difficult, so I flew into Seoul, obviously the capital of South Korea, and Seoul to Busan is still quite a distance. So I made it my own little adventure. And I booked myself on the bullet train and stuff like that. It was so cool. And Ben was there. I worked with, but Ben went a different route. So he flew direct into Busan, but I was just doing my own little thing. And then we met up when we got there. It's one of the most memorable trips I've had. And it's all the countries I've been around the world, they all give me something a little bit special. I try and take something away from all of them. But South Korea it's an incredible place. And that was a fitting end to that year. It was phenomenal.
That's really cool.
So how do you feel about the current state of the criteria? Is there anything you would change if you could?
For the criteria?
Yes.
No, not really. I think the criteria is pretty concise. We're working on it all the time. I'm part of the committee. I'm part of the ABC's Rules and Regs Committee, where we sit down with other noted and very well-versed people in this sport. And we talk about potential changes. We talk about things that we could do to perhaps make the sport better, more understood. But I think the criteria right now is, it's not the finished article. Obviously, it's things will, like I said about evolution, it's not let me put it to you this way. It's not the car we have to worry about. It's the people who's driving the cars. Mm-hmm. That's where the emphasis goes. So the car, I'm pretty happy with right now. I think they got the engine, still a little bit of fine tuning, a little bit of tweaking here and there, a few modifications as years go by, but the vehicle is pretty damn good. We just need to make sure that the drivers we put in the vehicles are even better.
When you say the drivers, are you talking about the quality of officials or quality of regulators?
Everyone.
Who are you talking? Everything.
I mean, primarily there, of course, I'm talking about, the quality of officials, referees, and judges. We need to have. It's the same as anything. I keep saying about any vocation, any industry. It's all about the level of competency. If you can get the best available people to do the job in hand, your rate of success is indefinitely greater, if that makes sense. If I'm going to always strive to put competent people to do a competent job, chances are I'm going to get a competent result. It's when we don't have that in place, or there could be a chink in the armor somewhere, or a little quirk or something like that, and then that's when things start to fall down a little bit.
So one of the things Scott and I wish more frequently happen in the sport is we'd like to see fewer warnings and maybe quicker to take points away when fouls occur. Do you think there's room to get more strict with point deductions instead of warnings? Not citing anything specific.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. Look, here's the thing. Different I guess I have a certain reputation, and I kind of find that reputation. It's a little bit unfair sometimes, but it's majorly when I come to the US. That's when I find it. People talk about it's like a funny thing. People talk about referees, and they go, "Oh, hey, he wants to be involved in the fight." Well, that's my fucking job, is to be involved in the fight. But nothing could be further from the truth. When I go in to referee a fight, I want to say two things. I want to say fight, and I want to say stop. And 99% of the time, that's what happens, because I'm an observer to watching the magic unfold. My job is to observe, and if an infraction happens or something happens with that, then I have to do my job. I have to do it. But I've kind of explained to people that that's not up to me. As a referee, my involvement in a fight, put it this way, a good referee, his involvement in the fight is decided by the fighters. So if something happens or the fighters create a problem, the referee will intervene and do his job. Yeah?
Yeah,
for sure.
A poor referee or an inexperienced or slightly less competent referee, their interjection in the fight is decided by them, because they're being over officious or they're being over egging it. When they've got things in a fight, I always keep the little memo in my mind is kind of like a half step back. Little infringements and fouls will happen in fights all the time. But if I was to verbalize on every single thing that happened in a fight, you don't want to hear that from referees, And obviously when you talk about taking points, don't forget it's a 3-round fight. Taking a point in something it can be quite monumental in the outcome of that fight. But that's not for me to determine.
Sure.
If a fighter is fighting within the confines of the rules and doing everything they can, fantastic. You're not going to hear from me. But then if a fighter, this is what I'm saying, like with fans and people in the spot, what do you want? Do you want to, as a referee, do you want them to be on there on the spot and deal with it? Or do you want them to ignore it? It's kind of like when they say about, the thing about officials being able to talk publicly. Oh, we want officials, we need to hold these officials to account and we want them to speak. And there's been many times that I've offered that instance up and they'll turn around and go, oh, he just wants the camera. And well, what the fuck do you want? You need to tell me what you want. It's just, look, it is what it is. It's not a perfect world out there, and officiating is such, especially in MMA, it's such a finite thing. It's such a detailed thing as well, but I don't know, but I do find that my frequent trips to the US will, I don't know if it's the accent, I don't know if it's the tone, but it's kind of like, I could ask a fighter for a glass of water and people think that I'm trying to kill him in the ring. It's crazy. I've had some unbelievable instances and stuff like that, but yeah, it's crazy.
For what it's worth, and maybe Dan and I are cut from a different cloth because we're fascinated by the kind of the thought process and I guess the art of officiating. So whenever we do get instances where an official, typically it's a referee, we almost never hear from a judge who would ever explain the reasoning there. That's usually backfired when it's happened. But when we hear from a referee who will kind of either take us through the process or maybe just say, hey, this was something I maybe regret or something like that to some degree, I always appreciate it personally. I think it's always nice to hear why it is, even if it's something we look at, because we're all fallible, right?
And this is the thing, but because what we have in this sport is some absolutely ridiculous, antiquated, out-of-date ideas that, well, no other sport does it. Well, that's why officiating in other sports is in such a fucking dire mess. Because if I'm going to speak about this sport and I'm going to speak about it publicly, no one needs to tell me how to do it. I'm not going to bring if as an official you are going out there on social media or having an interview or having a chat with guys like you and then saying stupid things and inflammatory things and ridiculous things and talking about, you're going to get what you deserve, right? But if you're going out there and you're trying to help articulate and educate about the sport and potentially some of the decisions that are made, etc., how the hell is that a bad thing? How can that be a bad thing? But you can't compensate for everybody, because whilst there is a good group of us who can articulate and talk with professional reason about the sport and officiating, there's also some other people who may not do such a good job. But listen, man, it's cost me work. It's cost me work because
It really has.
Yeah, 100%. It's cost me work.
Wow.
Because I have dared to offer explanation on something I've done. This is the thing, it's if you offer reason or explanation on something you do or a decision-making process, and you're doing it with professional courtesy, and you're crossing all your T's and dotting your I's, I couldn't surmise it any better. But people still think that's a bad idea. Like I said, I'm not going to change. I think I talk well on behalf of the sport. I think I talk well on behalf of, the officials. And believe you me, for every 100 opportunities I get to talk publicly on the sport, I'll accept 2 or 3. I just I'm not out there talking about it every 5 minutes and stuff like that. It's just I'm very selective. And obviously, when you guys reached out to me, obviously I'm seeing what you guys are doing. You've got a nice angle on this, and you're looking at things objectively. You're looking at, you can offer critique. You can, because that's fine. People
Sure.
think it's okay to disagree. It's absolutely fine.
Sure.
I'm a human being, and and as such, errors can be made. Or even if you offer reason or explanation to somebody, if people want to disagree with it and they don't see it that way, that's cool. That's fine. If we're doing it in a respectful, debated, open manner, happy days. What's not to love about that?
I agree. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm with you there.
We definitely appreciate you joining us. But could you tell us, maybe clear something up for us? How come a groin strike is really the only foul that gets that 5-minute recovery period and not something like an eye poke?
If you're poked in the eye and a doctor or ringside physician comes in, they can clearly see the subject matter at hand, right?
Right.
They look directly into your eye. So, for want of a better description, if you get a groin strike, the doctor's not going to openly cup your testicles and have a good examination of them in the ring. So
That'd
we
be
have
quite
to
a
give
sight.
them a lot. So we have to give them allotted time to compensate for that difference.
Okay.
That makes
No,
sense.
That makes sense.
It does. I think a lot of people need to hear that, Mark.
Yeah. Or, if we get the fabled dip kick, it's the examination that would be required is kind of on live TV in a stadium of people. You're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You're kind of precluded from taking your normal route as a doctor, right?
not the ideal stage.
Exactly. That's why we have. And funny, it's a good one you say that, talking about groin strikes, because that's like you said, the educational thing. Everybody, whenever you see somebody that gets fouled, other than a groin strike, everybody, why didn't you give him 5 minutes? You didn't give him the 5 minutes. Well, because that's the rule. He can't have 5 minutes. The groin strike is the only rule in unified MMA where the fighter can avail himself. The fighter remains in control of that 5-minute window. Every other single instance, it comes back to the referee and the ringside physician. It's only the groin strike that the fighter could sit there 4 minutes, 55 seconds, and then jump up and say, okay, I'm good to go.
So just hypotheticals, because I mean, maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but I feel like I've seen fights where at times fighters are given some length of time for their eye to recover. When that happens, that is wrong, right?
No. Here's the thing. So in unified MMA, a fighter will have up to, put inverted commas around, up to 5 minutes to recuperate. That means that it then comes down to the experience and the competency of the referee. If you get poked in the eye, for instance, obviously it's going to take a little bit of time to recover and clear. So we can call time out. We may have a dialogue with the fighter. We can elongate that 5-minute window again by bringing in the ringside physician, bring in the doctor, let the doctor check them, etc., etc. But the written rule is, upon a doctor's assessment or inspection, if he says that the fighter is good to go, then the fight must automatically restart. Basically, the fighter can't avail himself. But obviously, a good experienced referee, if we do see a fighter's hurt, and some, with eye pokes and other things, or a concussive, like a knee to a downed opponent, etc., we just try and use the time window that we have and just use it sparingly, and just a little bit of common sense, a little bit of courtesy to the fighter, and try not to rush them back into the action.
Thank you for elocuting that. That would, honestly, that's probably been the most helpful explanation I've had of the way eye pokes should be treated by officials. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
One more question before we close out here is, you mentioned a theme, I think, of this has been talking about the misconceptions in the sport, especially when training. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that either people come to you with when it comes to either scoring criteria or the rules about how to officiate, especially when it pertains to the fighters? Can you clarify any of that?
How long have you got?
You got plenty of time, whatever you got.
Well, there was a perfect one. Every foul, he's got 5 minutes. No, he fucking hasn't got 5 minutes. He don't have 5 minutes. Judges as well. We took him down at the end of the round. So fucking what happened for the other 4 minutes 58 seconds? Just if people think that he took him down, he ended up on top, he's won the round. No. People think that we judge fights on octagon control. That's like the criteria is all back to front. There are so many misconceptions. It's untrue, and that's why I said it's. I can't think of. I keep using the analogy of the upside down pyramid because the sport exploded so fast. It got big so quick, and obviously at the top of the tree is the mantle of the sport, the UFC, and obviously it's the they have the biggest prizes in the sport and the most prolific fighters, the most prolific fights, etc., etc. Obviously, everything that normally underpins that, from a developmental processes, it's kind of trying to play catch up, and a great example of that is the reason that we're talking here now. Obviously, with even the unified rule set. The unified rule set is anything but unified. There's still so many, even in the US, there's so many differences in quirks. But listen, it's changed more in the last 3 or 4 years than it has the last 15 combined, for the better. Slowly but surely, things are starting to evolve. Things are starting to come together. There's commonality, there's uniformity, obviously, unified, but in terms of, it just astounds me that on a sport, even some of the practitioners at the very, very top, some of the most seasoned, well-versed people with the biggest prizes in the sport, they're not completely aware of the rules. I don't know any other sport that happens in. If I'm playing football, like soccer, and I'm running with the ball and I suddenly stop and pick it up, I know there's a fucking problem. You understand?
Yeah.
Like we said with the boxing thing, if I'm boxing, I suddenly jump on someone's legs, I know there's a problem. If I'm driving a Formula One car and I try and reverse out the pit lane, guess what? There's a fucking problem. But MMA, we're still so far away from that. But to bring it back, like I said, the reason is because it's the inverted pyramid. The sport is kind of exploded out. It doesn't fit the clothes anymore. It's a bit like Tom Hanks when he went to bed and he woke up and he was fucking massive, and his clothes don't fit him anymore. And the clothes are the people and the rules and all the understanding, but it's going to catch up. There's some amazing people in the sport, and the commonality's there. And it's when I'm old and rocking back and forth in a chair, I'll probably people will wonder why I was getting so animated and irate.
Actually, and real quick, I do want to ask one more quick question because you kind of reminded me while you were talking about this. We have, I don't know how much American football you've ever watched, but there are rules experts or former officials who will kind of opine on what's going on in a certain rules situation. Do you think that the UFC like either would benefit or really could use someone like that? It doesn't have to be you, but someone who can really eloquently explain, hey, what's going on? Like, why would a fight be scored this way? Why would a referee do this?
Absolutely. That absolutely would help. And this is the thing where, like, I take it as a personal responsibility. I've got, like I said, when you hear people like, Ben Cartledge, Ben, who I class as a world-class judge, I would have him sat to my left or right in any fight, in any place, for any prize in the sport. That's how good he is, and he's and as many like him. Like I said, the guys in the US, that A team, that select band, those people are there, and like I said, but we've also got to be realistic. I talk about that when I said about if we were in a soccer stadium, there's this thing about MMA where a lot of people will fucking lose their minds because he said this and he said, she said, blah blah blah. We can't get to a utopia where every single person on the planet agrees with every round in every fight, and that's just not attainable. You can't get there. But I think that like talking to commentators is another. The commentators carry so much weight and emphasis, it's untrue. They're beaming the info to millions of people at the drop of a hat. If they are giving misinformation, that takes years to backpedal and fix. Mm-hmm. When you're used to hearing the same thing all the time for years and years and years, broadcast down your telly tubes to your ears at home, and you are the layman, you're just the casual, or you're a fan, and this, that, and the other. It's kind of hard to
deprogram.
Yeah, it's just a longer thing, but that's why I have I'll give you a cracking example here. Dan Hardy. When Dan, who I think is quite possibly the best analyst in the game right now, when he first got the job with the UFC, when he was going to get down the route of the commentary thing, he called me and he said, "Hey, I need to know when your next seminar is." And I said, "Oh, okay. It's a bit late for that now, mate. You fought at World Championship, and now you want to know the rule. What's wrong with you?" And he said to me, "Look, no, between you and me," he said, "I'm now going to be commentating for the UFC, and I want to know what I'm talking about." I nearly fell off my fucking chair, John Gooden did the same thing. These guys, how can you not want to even? And like I said, even if we could have a discussion with people and you may not necessarily agree, but they done their level best to at least try and get hold of and understand the correct information, so that when they're broadcasting and talking to people and explaining to them, they're kind of righting so many wrongs. It's such a powerful tool. The broadcasters and the commentators are so powerful in this sport in terms of education and getting the widest possible audience to understand exactly what the officials potentially could be up against or exactly what they're doing. It's critical.
I'm glad you named that commentary team, because they really do stand out, at least from our perspective, as the two that work together most often, and they very clearly will use the right terminology. They'll kind of walk the right line in explaining what's going on and really getting that information across to people. I feel like they're almost like your Trojan horse if you're trying to get that information, and these are the ones.
Yeah, they're very good.
Because I've had him up the wall and said, "Listen, make sure you get the." I've basically told him, "Make sure you get this information." But even like, all joking aside, like DC recently, Ben might have told you about. He reached out to him and stuff. Like, I'm always, and DC has been talking more openly about the fact of this is what the judges are actually looking for. This is what they're doing, and this is what they're potentially looking for. And when somebody, DC's a legend of the sport, ex-Olympian, 2-weight world champion. Everybody loves him. And when he's on, I think he's a damn good commentator too. And when he is obviously doing the biggest fights, all the pay-per-views, when he's dropping in those bits of information, he's covering so much ground so quickly for officials. And it's fulfilling, and it's great when you get people like that going out their way to get the correct information and make the sport better for everybody. It's awesome.
That's awesome. And I think that pretty much is a great place for us to end it here. So Mark, thank you so much for everything. I think we've all learned a lot, and I hope that our listeners have learned a lot as well. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it, guys. I enjoyed the chat.
Dan, like we said right before, right at the top of the show, this was a fantastic listen for you and I hope everybody who stuck with us and listened to the things that Mark had to say and speak with us about. I hope you really enjoyed it. I hope you learned a few things. But overall, I really was just taken by how much Mark very clearly cares about this sport.
Very passionate, man.
It's, I think that gets lost on most people who, when they just see the referee in the cage, are like, okay, what has this guy done before? What's he gonna screw up now? Or they're like, oh yeah, I trust this guy, he's good. I think you get one of those two reactions from people typically if they think about the referee at all before the fight. Right. But they don't think about just how much they actually care about the sport to want to be able to do this for a living when it's a very thankless job typically.
Oh yeah, everyone at the top level that are refereeing and judging these fights, they care very, very much.
And I would imagine at the lower level too, that you don't get into it because you don't care. Probably everybody who has, sat in the chair cage side to judge, or everybody who's stepped in as the third man, the third woman, or the other person, the other individual in the cage. I would say that probably all of them at least possess some passion for martial arts and mixed martial arts. So, but that really came across from Mark, and I hope that a lot of people picked up on that as well, because that's what we get whenever we talk to officials in private, is the passion they have for this sport. They care. They really do care.
For sure.
And I don't know if everybody knows that.
Well, they should know it. They
should. Everyone know it. Everybody cares.
Well, let's get into this weekend.
Yeah. Obviously, this is a big fight weekend too. We're gonna kind of squeeze this in at the end. UFC 258 pay-per-view coming from UFC Apex. They were already at Apex last weekend, and then looks like they're gonna be here for the foreseeable future. Championship fight at welterweight.
Yeah, Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns for the belt. Supposed to happen a while back, right? And then Burns got COVID.
So this was supposed to happen two consecutive times, or two times last year. It was first, it was going to be the one when Usman ended up fighting Masvidal. It was supposed to be that night, and that had to be canceled because he got COVID. But then it was supposed to be pushed into. I spoke with both the fighters actually earlier this week, and Gilbert was saying that it was pushed to they were aiming for late November, and then it ended up being more like December 12th, and then that had to get canceled. I believe it was that Usman was injured, so they pushed that fight again. And here we are.
February.
Well, how do you see this fight going down, Dan? I gotta know what you're thinking.
I'm really intrigued to see what would happen if Usman takes him down. How Burns is off his back, because he's world champ at jiu-jitsu. So
I wouldn't worry at all about what his game is off his back. I don't know that it's necessarily going to go that route. The one thing that kind of struck me when I was talking with Kamaru this week was he said we're all going to see what happens, and I don't think he meant that as kind of like a broad tease of like, oh, I don't want to make a prediction, we'll see. I think what he meant, he seemed to have some sort of perceived mental edge there, like he seemed to almost and this is me interpreting, this is my interpretation, but I got the sense that he was pretty confident based potentially on past experience.
Right. I just want to clear up. I wasn't saying I don't want to see what Burns can do off his back, like he's unproven or anything. I'm curious to see how Usman would deal with being on top of a world-class grappler.
Okay, now I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I wasn't discrediting Burns on his back.
No, I didn't.
So I just thought that would be an interesting part of the fight. I think Usman probably gets a decision. I don't know. It's really tough one for me because Usman's really, really good. So,
He's fantastic, but he is traditionally not a finisher.
not a fan. Yeah, I would expect a decision here, but
I don't know that he wouldn't be able to get a finish, but I think I have a lot of faith in Burns' ability to be durable. And, again, there's that track record from Usman. And these guys know each other so well that I almost feel like, as much as they might have been able to diversify their skill set at least a little bit in the past few months training separately, I don't think there's going to be a ton of surprises from them in there. So
right, yeah.
I'd have to think it's going to go to a decision, but I feel pretty confident that it's going to be Usman.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing about this fight is that they are training partners, so they know each other very well.
Yeah. No, we'll see.
Maybe the fight is similar to the Covington fight where he keeps it standing, and I don't know. I think it's a very intriguing fight. I'm excited to watch it.
I could see it being a stand-up battle because neither one of these guys was a striker coming up. Usman came from wrestling, Burns came from the grappling world, submission grappling, competition grappling, that kind of thing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's not one of those things where you'd say like it cancels out. I feel like, but they've been working on their striking, and I'd be curious to see if that's where they go, or if maybe they just take it everywhere. It's gonna be a really fun fight. I'm pretty excited for it.
Yeah, me too. Who should we expect judging this one?
Well, we didn't actually get to talk about that last week too much in the preview. I didn't truly know who we were going. I was expecting the same type of names we see in Vegas, but actually we ended up getting a few surprises. We saw Jaron Vallel for the first time in Vegas, who, my understanding, he's worked in other roles officiating in Vegas before, but this was the first time as a judge. And we've got guys like Rick Winter, who's not always in Vegas, but we've seen him there plenty of times in the last year. It was a bit of a surprise, but I do think there's probably going to be a few more of the typical judges we were seeing last year at UFC Apex.
Okay.
Obviously Sal D'Amato was there last week. Chris Lee.
We had Adelaide Bird.
Your typical mainstay. Adelaide Bird was there. Yeah, as another one we don't always see in Vegas these days. She's a Vegas-based judge, but we saw her too. Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a few more of the names that we do typically see than we had last week. But I didn't think on the whole it was such a bad collective last week either. I don't
think it was bad at all.
No,
they were solid.
And I expect the same this weekend. I'm sure. I don't know who's going to be officiating that title fight, but I do expect them to be needed for it. But also, I am not worried about it, and I rarely am, especially in Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, Vegas, California, both top notch. So,
which is hilarious because when you hear people online, they'll be like, "Oh, Vegas, you can't trust Vegas." It's like, where do you want the judges from? You want them from Mexico? I'm sorry.
We went over that a couple weeks ago.
We did. And I'm not trying to be cruel to the fine working judges in New Mexico. It's just there's levels.
I would take the New Mexico commission over Texas or Virginia.
I would take just about every commission over Texas. I'm sorry, Texas. It's just the way it is. But enough about commissions, enough about judges. What other fights do you want to see on this one? This is not the deepest card in terms of real top end value, but I think there's some fights of interest.
Definitely there's some good ones. I was interested before it got canceled or postponed. I was interested in Jimmy Rivera versus
Pedro Munoz.
Pedro Munoz, and
I wanted that one too, but obviously it's gone, and gosh, I hope we don't lose more.
But hey, I'm excited to see fellow Jersey boy Jim Miller back in action.
Former guest of the show,
taking on Bobby Green, two vets going at it. I think
you will always pick a Jim Miller fight.
It's so. I mean, I think Jim could win this one by sub. That's what I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with Jim sub guillotine. I
am going to say I think it's a decision. I actually feel best about saying it's a decision. I'll pick Jim. I think the grappling probably could be a boost for him. Although Bobby Green is no slouch at all.
Right. Both guys have a ton of fights and have a total of being finished 9 times. Yeah. So over almost 100 fights, and you only got finished. I feel pretty good about it going the distance. I'll pick Jim, but I feel very torn about this one. I could totally see Bobby Green taking it. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a really good fight. You know where Bobby Green is from? Where? Fontana, California. Oh, wow. Right. Well, what are you looking forward to? I want to see Rodolfo Vieira. We haven't seen him. He's going against Anthony Hernandez, the former LFA middleweight
champion who, he's gotten off to a little bit of a rocky start to his UFC run. He's 1-2 now. He had the no contest victory that was overturned on the Dana White Contender Series as well. But, he's got a win over Brendan Allen. This is a guy who can fight. Having said that, I feel really good about this being just a showcase for Vieira.
I feel like he's always in some kind of showcase. I mean, he's really good. Hernandez's last fight, he lost to Kevin Holland, so
he did.
That guy's on a tear. But Vieira, really excited about him. I think he can do really good things if he sticks to his bread and butter and doesn't become one of those grapplers that falls in love with their hands.
No, I'm gonna pick sub, and I'm gonna say round 1 sub.
Arm triangle.
What I think for Vieira.
I'm doing.
Obviously, it's gonna be a Gogo Plata. I've been waiting for this. It's gonna be that.
That would be something.
Just will it into existence.
The thing is, I just don't see it being on the ground with Vieira on the bottom. That would be how it gets there. Would be really interesting.
Hey, you never know. Maybe he gives up the position for the submission and just manifests himself. Or maybe he's like, gosh, I always wanted to be the first guy to get the Gogo Plata in the UFC, so I'm just gonna make it happen.
Does it count that Nick Diaz has one in Pride and now Pride got bought out by the UFC?
It does not count. That one is fantastic, and also it doesn't matter that fight was overturned. I don't care. That one still counts, but we're still talking about even if you count that one, that's like 14 years ago, Dan.
Which is even more impressive in itself. So
it's a long time. Yeah. I've been missing I want to go for a go.
All right, yeah. Vieira arm triangle round 1, and you got Gogo Plata.
Definitely Gogo Plata. Armbar, realistically armbar, but give me the Gogo. And that's it for us for the week. Thank you very much once again to Marc Goddard for joining us. We couldn't appreciate more him coming on the show and explaining to us, speaking to us, and everything. We hope to have him on again.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks again to Marc. Thanks to you all for listening. Have a great night.
Take care, everybody. Enjoy the weekend's fights.